in the southern United States and all over Mexico, and then some parts of the Caribbean and also parts of South America. So most of them are going to grow in hilly rock sides, places that have sand in the soil. And as of 2019, 270 species have been identified, and Mexico has the majority of them. But we also have some in the United States. We have about 15 different species. And then in Mexico, the state of Oaxaca has also the majority of agaves within Mexico. And just in 2018, 2 new species were described. So agaves are beautiful plants. They have large leaves arranged as a spiral, and they have a very, very small and almost invisible stem. And they actually form a beautiful rosette, and the leaves are thick and they are waxy. And the formation of the rosette actually helps the plant to collect the water and guide it towards the roots. So the leaves are also succulents. They contain water, and they all have a spine on the tip. The sizes vary, as we're gonna see. In the United States, they used to, or a lot of people still call them the century plant, because they used to believe that it will take 100 years for them to bloom. They don't, but they take a long time, from 8, sometimes 10, 12, up to 15 years to bloom. They are pollinated by bees and moths, but the Agave tequilana, from which tequila is made, which by the way is another talk, is pollinated by long-nosed bats. The agaves are also monocarpic. It means that the plant is gonna die after it flowers. So how the agaves propagate? There's different ways, but seems like the most effective one is by creating pups around them. In Spanish, we call them mecuates, and some are very, very good at giving us babies. There's also the seeds, but it has been confirmed that the majority of the seeds of agaves are sterile. And also, but I did see a technique in Oaxaca, which the farmers or the agriculture people, they collect the seeds and then they make incisions on the stalk, and then they place the seeds there. And then another way, and for this I couldn't find any articles referring to trying to grow a plant from the stalk, because they do that, and the aloes also do that. So I got this the other day from one of my aloes, and I put it in water, but nothing happens. It's not giving me any roots or anything. So the next thing I'm gonna try is just to pot it and see what happens. Next, please. Okay, so the most effective way of propagating is by planting the pups. Now, in the beginning, many years ago, agaves, along with the prickly pear cactus, were very important plants for the people of Mesoamerica. And this has been illustrated in some of the codices or manuscripts that were not destroyed by the Spaniards, because that's one of the things they wanted to do first, destroy everything related to this civilization, because we're gonna educate them and we're gonna Christianize them and you know the rest. Okay, so agaves were very, very important, and they appear in different records. They were used, for example, to designate a place. They used as an element of on glyphs, And also, whenever they were doing a tribute, and they will register that, they will use different illustrations of agaves. Sometimes it could be stylized like this, with a lot of imagination, but most of the times they will use the lifelike figures. So, what is pulque? Pulque is the oldest fermented beverage in the Western Hemisphere. And pulque, when the Spaniards arrived in Mexico, they noticed that the indigenous people were drinking something mildly alcoholic. And the name for that drink was Istac Octli. But the pulque sometimes very fast goes sour, goes bad. So the name for over-fermented or ruined product was Octli Poliuki. So from the Poliuki, the Spaniards said, oh, we're gonna call it pulque. So the juice of the agaves is called aguamiel or honey water. And there are two types of aguamiel that people consume in Mexico, from agaves and also from sugarcane. So interestingly, the production of this drink has not changed over the years, just some aspects that I will be mentioning. There are many myths about how people discovered this drink. And the Aztecs were not the first. There were other groups, the Otomis, the Toltecs. They already had discovered that they could get this drink from the agave plants. So it is believed, or they believe, that lightning struck one of the agaves, and then they found out that there was this wonderful juice coming out of it. Other myth talks about a possum, that a possum actually was eating the core of the plant, and he found the honey water. And also in other ethnic groups, they believe it wasn't a possum, it was a rabbit. So, and interestingly, for many years, it was believed that pulque had been discovered about 1,000 years AD after death. And that wasn't the case. In 1968, there was some excavations in the town of Cholula in Puebla. They were excavating pyramids in ruins, and they discovered a magnificent mural. It was 56 meters long and 2 meters high, and through scientific studies, it was found out that it was 200 to 300 years AD, so much older than what we had expected. And that mural is called the Pulque Drinkers. And you can identify the beverage by the foam, because it is a foamy drink. Gods and goddesses were many associated with this drink. But Mayahuel, the goddess Mayahuel, seems to be the most prominent one. She is presented in different ways. In this one, she's holding the rope, because agaves give us very nice fibers to make rope. But also in others, she's presented with 400 breasts, because it was believed that she gave birth to the 400 rabbits, and these rabbits were associated with drunkenness. So, the way they did it, they first, of course, they had to be sure that the plant was ready. And when the plant is ready to produce the aguamiel, is before it's gonna flower. So they used to cut the stalk, and then they, of course, had to cover the opening. And after some time, the amount of aguamiel will increase. That was the first thing. It was a sweet drink, but later they discovered that if they left it in the core of the plant longer, it will become alcoholic. And the reason for this, and I'm going to show you in the next slide, is because agaves have more than 30 different microorganisms in their core. Some are yeast, but the majority are bacteria, and they work in transforming the sugars into alcohol. So this is the difference between aguamiel, which is very clear, still very sweet, and this is pulque. Pulque is gonna be milky, it's gonna be, well, the way they describe the taste, people have, it's an acquired taste, people have to like it. It's between sweet and sour, it's sharp when you first drink it. And these are the two microorganisms that are the most active fermenting the sugars, Thermobacterium mobile and Simomonas mobilis. And interestingly, these plants also, they not only have sugars, they also have amino acids, they have iron, and they also have vitamins. So it's very good for the people. It was very nutritious. But however, they were very strict, the Aztecs, for the consumption of this drink. It was only served for priests, for warriors who were returning from war, but on 5 days out of the year, people were allowed to drink it freely. The only ones who could drink pulque without penalties were the elderly and pregnant women, because they knew that it was very nutritious. So, so what were the penalties for drunkenness? Awful. The youngsters, I'm going to show you a slide, will get punished with the thorns. But the older people will get killed. Or sometimes, if they didn't find the offense too big, they will tie them up in the plaza and people will make fun of them, and they will leave them there for a few days with no food or drink. So they were very strict about the consumption of this drink. And the Spaniards arrived in 1519. It took him 2 years to make it all the way to the area of Mexico City. They arrived in Veracruz. And so the conquest occurred 2 years after their arrival. And what happened when they arrived is, obviously they came with this mind that they were going to destroy everything related to the culture, but they were fascinated. They saw things they had never seen before. Water, the streets were clean, and then they noticed also that the Aztecs had a lot of knowledge about plants. So they decided not to touch that, and they also designated agaves as an economic giant because they were very important in the culture. Agaves were a source of food. The stalk is edible. I have eaten that as a child. We call it quiote, but it has a lot of fiber, so you kind of chew the juice, and then you have to spit the fiber. It's too much to swallow. The flowers can be covered with eggs, mixed with eggs, and you can make different dishes. And then we also have the mixiote. The mixiote is the pellicle, the cover of each leaf of the agaves. And just recently, I found out that Pico's restaurant on Kirby, they are preparing some meat using mixiote. So that was my first time. So all these things are current, even though they occur so many years ago. Agaves were a very important source of fibers. They use the fibers to make fishing nets. They also use them to make their sandals. The thorns were used to sometimes as needles. Also, the thorns were used for discipline, especially the youngsters. And one time, somebody asked me, if this strategic position of the thorns meant that the Aztecs knew acupuncture. And the answer is no. They were not familiar with acupuncture. That's the way the rituals that they use for punishment. Agave leaves were also used to make collages, and they were also used to cover different meats and cook them. And this is the way the barbecue is made in Mexico. In a wall on the ground, and then covered with agave leaves, and then it cooks for, I don't know, 1 day or 2 days. Agaves are also an indirect source of food because they have two different, one butterfly and one moth. The larvae parasite the agaves. The first ones are the worms are white, and they're the worms of Agave hesperaris, and the red ones actually live in the roots, and they are the larvae of the moth, Comadia this is a difficult word, Redtentbackeri. And you here see the plate of worms. In Oaxaca they still sell them, and also in Mexico they use the agave to give authenticity to the mezcal. So I said that that's a different talk, but I'm just gonna mention when the Spaniards arrived, they already knew the distillation process because they had learned that from the Arabs. The Arabs dominated the Iberic Peninsula for 800 years. So they came to Mexico with stills. So eventually they looked at the pulque and they decided, well, maybe we can not just ferment it, but also distill it. And again, that's another culture. And another completely different talk. The stalks were used to make musical instruments, and there's also descriptions of medicinal products. Here it is somebody applying a poultice made with agave on somebody's head. Once the Spaniards, of course, many years had passed when they discovered, well, these people have a rich culture. Then they started trying to document everything. So there were many botanists that visited Mexico in the 1700s, 1800s. But the most important books are the one prepared by Friar Bernardino de Sahagún. He actually came to live in Mexico, learned the Nahuatl language, so he described about everything that the Aztecs used to do. And of course, he describes how the maguey was scraped out, the bountiful maguey was discovered, from which aguamiel, honey water, comes. The word maguey was given to the agaves by the Spaniards because it reminded them of a plant they had seen in the Antilles. This was a physician that came to Mexico many years later after Sahagún. Francisco Hernandez, he was sent by the king, and his job was to document all the medicinal plants. So we can see agaves in his book. Okay, so before the Spaniards arrived, the Aztecs just used the agaves that were growing wild. But this particular man, the Marquis Pedro Sanchez de Tagol in the 1600s, taught him how to prepare a field with these plants. The agaves have to be transplanted about 3 times. The first one is the nursery. This is when the agaves are very, very little, and these are the pups, right, that were removed from the mother plant. And in many fields in Mexico, the rows sometimes are wider, so they can grow other legumes or rice or beans. And after 3 years, they reach about 3.5 feet in height, and they are pulled out, and they are transplanted again. So this is gonna be the final field where this is a process that takes years. The people really have to be very patient. It takes about 10 to 12 years for that plant. So once they're gonna start producing the stalk, the plant gets castrated. They cut the stalk, and that reduces the death or delays the death of the plant. And then they let them repose or rest for some time. So again, this process initiated with just collecting everything, just the honey water, or leaving it there if they wanted the pulque, or in the old days they used pork skins or gourds for to store the pulque and let it ferment. Now, the tlachiqueros are the men who actually collect the fluid from the agaves twice a day, early in the morning and early in the afternoon. So the process, again, that has not changed. There's no modern technology. So you can see also, I want you to see the size of these plants. They're huge. Anyways, and every plant can produce anywhere from 1,000 to 2,300 liters or 625 gallons over the course of 4 to 6 months. So that was a reason, again, that the Spaniards said this is a lot of money. Anyways, the one thing that changed over the years is that now the fermentation process takes place in wooden vats, also provided initially by the Spaniards. In this room is called tinacal for 2 to 10 days, and then the master brewer, they need to know exactly what is the point in which the fermentation has taken place. They need to be very careful, otherwise it goes bad. So people really know, and interestingly, there's a lot of superstitions in Mexico about the tinacales. Number one, women cannot enter because they bring bad luck. And second, men cannot enter with their hats on because the pulque gets sour. One of those beliefs. Okay, so I'm just going to show you about 3 different species of the agaves used to make pulque. Just as a general rule, they're big. They're bigger than the ones we're used to see. So they take 10 to 12 years. We already talked about the yield of aguamiel. They remain in production 4 to 6 years. And then the best agaves grow in cold, dry climates and high altitude, and that is in central Mexico. Salmiana is one of the agaves used. I would like to mention to you, they call it manso or docile because it doesn't hurt anybody who's working on it. The spines are strong and sharp, but again is more docile or manso than the others. This is the one that produces the best pulque. Mapisaga. This is a very, very large agave that it can grow very, very tall, 8.2 feet tall to 14.8 feet in diameter. So these leaves are very hard to touch. Now, Atrovirens. Atrovirens is the largest of all the agaves. And this is native of Oaxaca, Puebla, and Veracruz, and they also call them maguey. Verde means green, grande, big, or mountain agave. And the fourth one I'm going to mention is Americana. The one thing the tlachiqueros need to be careful with Americana is that the sap is very irritant. So they develop very rough, very bad dermatitis. And the other thing is that the fibers, after they produce the pulque, get collected, and they are used to this embroidery work, especially in belts. The fibers are usually called pita, and this type of work is called piteado, belt piteado. And because it takes so long, they're expensive. I think a belt like this, it will cost about $40. Okay, so this is the current area where pulque is just produced and consumed. Why? They try different things. They try bottling. They try the railroad, but it goes bad. So it has to be consumed close to where it's produced, right? And so Mexico City, and then parts of Tlaxcala, Puebla, and Hidalgo. That's it, no more. So, okay. Now let's talk briefly about what happened to the pulquerias. These were the places where people would go and consume the pulque, and the same day that it was delivered. In the 1600s, there were about 36, and that's because the Spaniards still put some pressure, and they limited because they associated the drink with the devil and things like that. So, but after the Mexican independence, the drink became more popular. So from 1880 to 1910, it was the golden age of pulque, because it became mainstream. Even people who were wealthy started consuming this drink, which in the past it was just for poor campesinos, and farmers. But in 1928, pulque suffered a lot because beer was introduced into Mexico, and then the beer companies started bad rumors that the fermentation of pulque was taking place using cow feces and things like that, so they lost a lot of customers. So in 1964, there were about 1,000, and now in 2012, it went down to 72, and it has continued to decline. This is some other pulqueria. They have a lot of drawings of the plants and gods and everything, but we also have vendors that sell the pulque fresh in the streets. And this is another variation that has become very popular. These pulques are mixed, or they call curados, cured, and some have pine nuts, some have pistachios, some have oysters and tomatoes, so all kinds of variations. And there are two museums for pulque in Mexico. One is in Mexico City, but you could miss it because there's so many people selling religious items and everything. But the most beautiful one is in Tlaxcala, and I will hope to visit that someday. So what happened after all this? Well, there are people still trying to bottle it. You know what they do to stop the fermentation? They sterilize it. They sterilize the drink. And I don't think there's a lot of distribution here. I Googled Total Wine because that's where we buy our drinks. But they are selling one bottle pulque in California. So I don't know when it will make it here. And I don't know, again, how popular it is. It will be interesting to keep an eye on that. So what is the future of pulque? Who knows? But one thing that is important is the conservation and the revitalization of the spaces where the plants are cultivated. There's the agaves are being butchered and everywhere. There's now over 1,000 different types of tequila, God knows. So, but the one positive thing is described by some authors is that the youth, they gaining interest in this old tradition, and they're visiting the pulquerias. So we'll see what happens. Thank you very much for your attention. Do you have any comments or questions?
Is there a drinking age required to purchase the drink in Mexico?
Not really, but it's supposedly just like in the US, about 18, 19.
Do you like it?
I have never tried it, but it would be interesting. I've been in Mexico City many times, but I have never visited a pulqueria.
Was it typically consumed warm?
No, cold.
Cold?
Mhm.
What's the alcohol percentage? Is it like wine or beer?
Like a beer.
Okay.
Yeah, I had one slide.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Do you know the difference between mezcal and pulque, or kind of?
Of course. And that will be another talk one day, so I hope you will invite me again. What the Spaniards did when they saw this pulque and they saw that it got fermented and everything, they started the distillation process. And that's how mezcal was born. And then later, tequila is a type of mezcal. Mezcal is made with 10, 12 different types of agaves, but tequila is only made from agave tequilana Weber. That's it. That's the difference. And because tequila always reach a higher status, right? They never put a worm in tequila. But in mezcals, you still see the worms. Any other comments or questions?
So the agave americana, that's the one that grows here in Houston, right? So we could wait for one to flower and then get our agave miel.
And see what happens. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your attention.
Coryphantha macromeris. Next slide, please. So for the plant itself, it's a cluster of small individual bodies. They're kind of a bluish green color, and they're fairly squishy. Especially when they're dehydrated, they get really soft, but they never get quite as firm as like a column cactus, like a San Pedro or something. And they do form a big cluster, and in the wild they can get as big as 3 feet wide, and they form like a dome shape where the oldest, largest ones will be in the middle, it'll be taller, and then the younger, smaller ones as it gets further away. Next one. There's a big variation in how many spines they can have. They can be as little as 2 to 8 central spines, the ones that stick out, and then 9 to 15 white radial spines. And so these are two, sorry, go back.
Oh, sorry.
These are two examples of like some really, really dense ones. And then next one. This is a lot more similar to the one that I have, where it's very sparse and you can easily see the bodies. And that's a good example of like the dome shape that it takes on in the wild. Next one. The flowers are pretty familiar cactus flowers, similar to like a astrophytum and many others, except rather than yellow, you have this pink. Some can be almost white, or they go all the way to like almost a stronger purple color. The one on the right is actually a subspecies, and that might be one of the indicators that it's more white than others. And you can also see on that one that it has very small spines, like hardly any by comparison to the other ones you're looking at. Next slide. The fruit that comes after the flower is sort of nondescript, kind of a pale green, smooth, and you can see on like a heavily spined cluster, it's going to be almost disappearing under the spines. But on a more sparse one, it might stick out, and then you can see that one still has the dried out flower on it. Next one. So it tolerates some pretty rocky and gravelly soils, but you sometimes see it in clays, fairly like hardened up clays, or even sandy ones. You tend to see them more in partial shade, often with like a mother plant or a nurse plant, I mean, and sometimes also next to rocks and boulders or on hillsides. But you do see them out in the open in just the broad sun. Next, please. So these are two examples of them in a very rocky, gravelly soil. And then the next one is more of a, sorry, one more. This is more of a clay, like dried up with no rocks, very smooth, like it's, rained and then completely hardened. And this is also a good example of the flowering. Oftentimes you'll have many, many blooms at the same time. And this is also a good example of the darker purple flowers that they sometimes have. This is an example of a sandy soil, also with a nurse plant next to it. Rather small cluster actually. And then as far as the range, it is predominantly in Mexico, but it does come up into the US with some in New Mexico and Texas. And I also think it's interesting that there's a little island in this range. It's kind of unusual. But yeah, predominantly in Mexico, Durango, Tamaulipas, Coahuila, Chihuahua, San Luis Potosi, Zacatecas, and then, like I said, a little bit in the US, New Mexico, and Texas. But I mean, it's pretty much dead center in the Chihuahuan Desert. And the IUCN rates them as least concern. They're not endangered at all at the moment. They're pretty prolific there. Next one, cultivation. So, in my experience for Houston, not very good for outside. If like in the ground, we get too much rain, and it'll also, these do not tolerate a hard freeze like we've had the last few years. So keeping it in a pot works well. Just bring it in when you have to. They're not super picky about the potting soil because you can see that they're adapted for some pretty brutal conditions. But the classic good draining cactus mix should do you pretty well. I have a like 25% coarse sand, 25% pumice, half Fox Farm Ocean Forest potting mix. It's been pretty happy, and then I use top rocks with it. As far as propagating, you can propagate it by cuttings, but they're kind of temperamental. I took several out of the cluster I bought, and almost all of them just rotted. Like, they did form a root or something, and they seemed like they were getting on, and then next thing you know, they were just gone. So I'm sure it's possible with more practice and maybe more idealized conditions, but they are a bit picky until they get more established. Or you could try to get seeds. That seems to work too, but I don't have any personal experience with growing them from seeds. I've been growing mine with 50% shade cloth outside most of the time, unless it's heavily raining. You could, as we see from the habitat, you could potentially get it to do full sun, but mine's seems pretty happy with the 50%, so I've just decided to leave it that way. And then over winter, I did use a grow lamp rather than hibernating it. I've read some articles that say that hibernating it, or dormancy rather, encourages it to flower, but I don't have any personal experience with that. And as far as availability, I've never seen it at a big box store like Lowe's or Home Depot. I got mine from the fall sale here, and I have seen it available on the internet from specialty retailers, but that's all I really have to say about it. Any questions?
Did you find out, or have you read what influences the formation of spines a few versus a whole
Oh,
lot.
I'm not sure if it's just genetic or if maybe it's like environmental, like the more brutal sun maybe. Because I've seen a lot of the actual habitat photos, they're the super spiny ones a lot of the time, and then the like ones for sale tend to, or ones that are grown in like little pots tend to be the ones that aren't as spiny. So I wonder, but that's just a speculation of mine, I don't know.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Nope. All right, well, thank you very much. And,
Thank you.
All right, to talk about a Sansevieria, Lauren Lindsay.
She was unable to make it.
Yes, she didn't come.
Yeah, she's unable to come today, so we're going to just read about it in the KK. All right, thank you very much. Sarah is our membership, and she's gonna talk about.
Thank you everyone for coming. Today we had 40 members going up today, and we have 7 guests. Can the guests raise your hand to see? We can welcome. Here we have a lot of fun. We organize 2 sales a year. We visit member gardens, so we can get learn and have some inspiration about how to keep working with our gardens. So you're welcome here, and if you want to become a member, you can contact Mary, but she's not here today.
Not here, she's out of
Yeah,
town.
you can contact them right here. Thank you. And we have 6 store prizes. So I'm gonna use my random number generator. So we can call the people. No cheating. So we are 1 to 40. Okay, number 37. Jose Jimenez. Oh, Jose Jimenez, you always get lucky.